Hello, Internet. My name is Gix, and I'm here to talk about Starfield. I haven't done one of these in 10 years. I was sharing my thoughts on Skyrim, which was also a commentary on gameplay trailers. For those coming here because they just search for anything that's related to Starfield, I just wanted to say that I'm a huge Elder Scrolls fan, not just because of their lore, but also for like the Bethesda style RPG moment to moment gameplay. I'm not here to fanboy on Bethesda as a company. That's a completely different discussion. But I just wanted to geek out about the game mechanics and whether or not Starfield will bring anything new to the Bethesda formula or just RPGs as a whole. Um, so, generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of how sci-fi is usually depicted in media. When you think about like video games or movies, I tend to prefer fantasy. That's not to say I can't enjoy sci-fi. It's just that usually for me, for sci-fi, when it's done right, I'll jump into it. But I like to be thinking about the human condition when dealing with like sci-fi matters. So yeah, I'm more of a Star Trek guy compared to a Star Wars, for example. Um, Now, that's not to say that I can't enjoy Star Wars. It's just one of those things where if I'm going to deal with space wizards, I don't know, I tend to prefer the fantasy stuff. Um, with that said, though, this trailer, um, the music, it sets the mood um, straight up.
Control, this is Constellation Starship Frontier. We're ready to start on your signal. Maintaining exit vector course. Steady till ready. Coordinates input. Plotting jump course.
So for me, the music, it seems like a negligible thing. Although some will argue that music it makes a video game in some extent, and I tend to agree. But for me, because I'm watching a trailer, anything that they might present to me, I'm not getting that vibe from gameplay. Um, like the music to me is just superficial on that front from a trailer. But what this tells me though, it's got a very nice Apollo 13 or Star Trek, the original series vibe, and it's almost refreshing for me. I mean, it's one of those things that, I just said earlier, like I usually tend to prefer fantasy, but this tells me like, oh, at least they're trying to do sci-fi right, um, because it could be like a giant space, adventure. We don't know about that, but with that type of music, I'm feeling that they're more about the undiscovered country. If you know what I mean. So this just few seconds of music is very encouraging to me. Gives me a lot more interest in that game because of how they're trying to invoke or evoke the feeling of space exploration and make you think rather than just shoot. Um, you're thinking about that versus like Star Wars, which is bad right in your face, and it's not bad, right? The theme song of Star Wars is fantastic, but it's a different vibe, and I'm looking for this vibe when I'm thinking sci-fi. So that's the type of thing that I wanted to point out. It's promising me that it's going to be more thoughtful experience. So this is good. And I stopped it here because right after that, it kind of showcases what I believe is a hint of how they're gonna do space travel. So very, typical to practically every other game that's set in space. Escape Velocity, Elite Dangerous, Eve Online, Pulsar, Lost Colony. Um, there's tons, right? Even outside of the spaceship flying games where you have Master of Orion, Homeworld, that sort of thing. Um, it feels like zone based is the way to go for sci-fi, and there's like I'm okay with that, but it also tells you that you're gonna be, traveling faster than light between these systems. So there's going to be a loading screen between the two, that sort of thing. Probably like a Mass Effect style transition, or I'm thinking maybe like towards like Destiny, where you have your spaceship flying while it's loading, that sort of thing. Um, Assuming there's loading, yeah, because who knows? Like on the next gen, um, generation of computers or consoles, maybe it's going to be seamless. But I'm still thinking, well, it's an old engine, not just graphically, or I was going to say not necessarily graphically, but I'm talking about like the core of it, inside of it, underneath the graphic engine. It's a very old engine, so maybe they won't be able to take advantage of the new tech. But this is, confirming that, okay, so you'll go node to node from system to system. And I'm thinking that this is probably the way that you'll also interact with it. I mean, it's not necessarily verbatim to what you'll have in the game, primarily because you don't see the names of any of the systems, which would be kind of a problem when you're trying to find out how to, like, where to travel. But maybe, undiscovered systems will just be random blank dots like that. Who knows? Um, it's interesting to think about what they're going to do compared to a destination, like a point of interest that you would see like in either Skyrim or or any other the Bethesda game previous to this, where it's like you only discover it until you get there, right? On your map, I mean, because you can always easily see it from your compass. Um, or you see it on a distance. But for like star travel or space travel like that, you won't necessarily see it in a distance other than like a little dot on your screen, right? So I'm thinking here they're probably allowing you to travel to places you've never been before rather than the other way around where fast travel would only happen if you've been there before. So this is like an interesting twist, right? um, So I'm thinking this screen, which looks almost like a straight up out of a Pit Boy, but this is probably something you'll see on your ship when you're flying and you're trying to, mark a new course, chart a new course to. Probably not like one to one. You'll probably like camera will probably pull back where you see more of like the contour of the monitor, knobs and stuff like that. But I'm thinking that this is the display that you'll see for when you're charting it. I'm hoping that they'll be more detailed, but it's one of those things where it kind of confirms that okay, this is the type of game that's going to be it. It's like a zone base and stuff like that. Um, so I mean, that could be the loading screen, little arrow, moving on the line. This I got nothing to comment on. It's just shatters my eyes. It's a little too. Uh, there's a logo. Um, Too hectic for color change and stuff like that. And then he talks and he talks. I'm just gonna fast forward a little bit to the juicy parts. Here, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm gonna try to condense that as much as I can. But there's a lot to talk about. The first thing that jumps out to me is the color palette. I'm getting a lot of Fallout 3 vibes from this. Now, Fallout 3 had um, a greenish tint to it. Uh, I think was it New Vegas that had like an orange tint, but it's like very monochromatic. It's not ugly, but I feel this would probably be tiresome really quickly, at least for me. This is one of the things that, as much as I enjoyed Fallout 3, it was a game where every time I would roam around in the wasteland, I would be visually bored. Except for like looking at like points of interest, the horizon line was very desolate, very um, dreary just to look at it from a color palette. And they kind of injected more colors with, uh, you know, Fallout 4. Skyrim had a more interesting palette. But yeah, I'm a little disappointed in this shot. We do have some colors, vegetation is red, and there's like uh, uh, patches of dirt on the ground. I'll talk about that a little bit later. That's also red, and you got some like green crystals and stuff like that. Rock formations that are green. The gases coming out of geysers have like a little green tint, but usually it's like very gray, and I'm not too keen on that. But with that said, this is a very easy to render. So I can't imagine this being very demanding on the computer. So that's kind of good. It means that there's less chance of like pop-ins happening, um, because terrain is very easy to render. You just put a lens flare in there, and you got terrain pretty much where it needs to be. So the rest of it, it's to me, this speaks that it's less about macro detail and more about micro detail. And by that I mean like macro detail for me is about, do you see a castle in the horizon or like a giant skyscraper? Do you see trees? Do you see like you know, a caravan somewhere? Uh, you don't see none of that. So it's more about, okay, well, in terms of macro, it's basically just, well, here's a rocky landscape. But in terms of macro or micro, you got like, okay, well, here's the little details on the rock and the grass and stuff like that. And that's easier to render because you can really focus that detail, closer to the camera. And as you go further and further into the distance, you don't have to worry about what we call imposters, like cards or LOD, where it becomes like a little flat JPEG. Um, where I don't know if you remember. I mean, even like Black Desert Online, you see that on the trees. Not so much Skyrim, but Skyrim it does happen. But like I was thinking about like Oblivion, where buildings would be like cubes until you get closer, and then the shape would load in. Trees would be flat JPEGs until you would get closer, and then the tree would manifest itself in 3D. So in my mind, this is a lot easier to render, and they can focus more of the GPU power into what's really close to you. So it'll probably look more real than your traditional Bethesda game because they don't have to render um, that much detail in the background, right? Because a rock is a rock, it'll look good wherever the distance is, and that's another thing. It's like when you think about shaders, it's okay. So you got a castle in the background. Well, is that going to be the same texture as the stones next to it? Probably not. Do you want to have flags on the castle? Yes. Are the flags moving? And each of these components, have a different shader. Will have a different like vertex displacement to it. Maybe if it's the flags are moving, or if like the trees are blowing in the wind. Um, you don't really have that detail when you're looking at something like this, right? And you'll notice like the building, if you can see it, the building is like right here and it's barely noticeable. So it's one of those things where, in terms of LOD, level of detailed, you know, they can, get away with things that look low res without you noticing it until you get closer to it. So, from a technical standpoint, a sci-fi is like really easy to do because like I'll be surprised if you'll see flags or emblems blowing in the wind, or you know trees swaying and stuff like that, when you can just put like a square building. um, the shape of the building I'll get in more detail later, but this is like on the first screen, this is all of like the thoughts that I have. um, yeah, and of course the guys are in the smoke really look cool, and this is also something that you could probably do some level of detail where in the distance you probably have a lower resolution um, particle, or they just get less dense further in the distance, but up close you'll have like super dense particles to create like very convincing smoke. So yeah, this is you know what's been in my mind. Um, let's see. The camera is very, very much a Bethesda camera. Again, it's the same engine, so that kind of helps. But what I mean is like the speed and the rate at which they present things. Like you'll see it later where spaceship. Yeah, okay, that's. I wonder if that's actually a gameplay camera. Um, I'll get back to the camera, but this is something. This shot tells me, and it's not just the shot, but like it's the animation that goes with it. I'm looking at the smoke, and what I'm getting out of the smoke is that we're losing frames on the smoke, but just the smoke. So there's something here that's very, very weird. Um, so I guess the smoke itself is like an animated image, and that animation is for some reason in lower fidelity, and I'm hoping that they'll rectify that in the. But that could also mean that they're just kind of saving on power for something else, right? Trading power elsewhere. But it also tells me, which is this is a weird thing, is that they're not using volumetric smoke, which is something that was we could do back in DirectX 10. DirectX 10, I think, introduced the concept of volumetric effects, such as smoke. Um, and they're not using it. You can see it kind of going through the spaceship, which it no big deal, but it's something that I wanted to point out where they're not using all of the new tech for this type of stuff, probably for good reasons. Um, but yeah, and now we got this shot here. At first, I thought this was going to be a power suit, but it's just like an NPC, so I'm okay with that. And the architecture, I think that the environment artists are pretty good at environments. They always were good at environments, but over here, um, they're getting the grungy space type of stuff really, really well. So I think like Fallout 3 and 4, um, got their feet wet with that, and they've gotten better at it because this looks really good. Um, Here is where I'm getting the No Man's Sky type of vibe. Like scanning and stuff like that. Which means that you're probably going to have to land like kind of like a Mass Effect, where it's like you put your rover down and just collect resources. I do you can you collect resources from your spaceship? I don't believe so, but I haven't played that in a long time. But yeah, I'm thinking you'll have to land here and collect the stuff. Um, but yeah, the thing that got my attention here is this little bit right there. Um, for many reasons. I'll mention a few later, or one in particular later. But this one is like, okay, there's temperature, there's gravity, and then there's oxygen. And the one that I'm wondering about is mainly temperature, because hardly have I ever seen temperature matter in a video game. So probably to me, this is just like a role play value. Like it doesn't do anything mechanically. I'd be kind of curious to see what that does, if any. Oxygen, unfortunately, it's one of those things where I hope it's just like an aesthetic, because usually in games, and again, it goes back to what I was saying about sci-fi uh, being less of a preference for me, is because it's stuff like this, right? It doesn't lend itself to work really well in a video game because okay, you got oxygen, which is a very binary thing to do. You either can breathe or you can't, right? So what do? You're carrying like oxygen tanks around. Do you have to reload your oxygen tanks? How often do you have to do that? Because if it if you run out of oxygen too fast, then it becomes a chore. And if it doesn't run out fast enough, then it's like, what's the point? So you know, I'm wondering about that as well. Um, and then the gravity would be interesting to see. This is probably the easiest one to do, where it's like you just change the gravity for this zone, right? If you're thinking about the planet in as a zone that you load in, you could just say gravity here is at 0, and you can jump on like crazy. Um, they'll probably not going to do that, but I'm hoping that this is something that we'll play with from planet to planet, because it would be really cool if the environments are going to be generic like this, um, which I think is the main concern that people have. I'm hoping that stuff like gravity and oxygen will come into play, where then it becomes more interesting to be on those planets. The navigation of it rather than just the vistas, right? So that's where I'm getting what I'm thinking about when I'm looking at this type of stuff. Um, Again, very monochromatic. It's red, gray, smidge of green. The red here makes me think that they're using it as like pavement. And of course, it's supposed to be like all natural creation, stuff like that. But um, like it's because everything is monochromatic and plain. What the road is doing, being red, and it's not road, it's dirt. But to me, it's like, okay, it's painting a road. It's trying to guide you to. You don't even see it right now, but there's like a base, right? Um, it's guiding you to that. Um, yeah. Other than that, it looks fine. But like I was mentioning earlier about the camera, right? This is the type of camera work that I was referring to. Uh, where it's like, okay, head bobbing and stuff like that. Third person looks exactly like Skyrim or the Fallout games. Got nothing to say about the alien. Honestly, it looks fine. It doesn't look super impressive, and it doesn't look bad. So it's one of those things where, okay, they're aliens. The design itself looks kind of cool. Um, but gameplay wise, I'm not getting anything out of it, and technically speaking, I'm not getting anything about it either. Again, red leading you to the station. There's a little bit of green here, but yeah, I'm mainly worried about the visually, the visual aesthetics of it, the not the execution of the graphics, because I think the fidelity will look good, but the again, based off what I was saying earlier about the draw distance, with not having to draw, from super far away and stuff like that. The macro detail versus the micro detail. Here, they're focusing on the micro. I'm not worried about the fidelity. I am worried about the variety of the environments, um, right? Because with the amount of planets that we're going to have, which is they say like 1,000 planets or whatever, um, you're almost strong arming yourself into designing each planet with its own color palette, right? Oh, but this one's green with like blue crystals. The other one is green with, I don't know, blue mushrooms. And then you're kind of like, oh, the other one is red with green crystals. So it's, I don't know. I'm, there are examples in this video that tell me otherwise, but at the same time, those are probably far and few in between. Um, and then you got the gathering stuff and whatnot. Uh, Although I wanted to point out, like you only see this part about the planet info on your Pit-Boy, um, only when you're scanning for uh, like materials or like the fauna and stuff like that. So I'm thinking your Pit-Boy is the one that's scanning, um, and this circular shape comes back multiple times, and I'll get back to that in a bit. But like once you stop scanning, it goes back to this thing, which I don't know what that is, other than maybe that's the orientation of the planet to the sun. Is that going to play an effect on that? If it does, bravo to the developers, but I don't buy that. So maybe it's just like a role playing thing. It probably does tell you like the time of day, maybe, but even then, it's probably not like real time. Oh, you're on the sphere that's rotating around the sun. Like, I don't think that's happening here. But it is interesting that you don't see any other info of the planet unless you're scanning something on the planet. Um, Probably something you can like look into or look up at any other time. But right now they show it as something that you can only see. And this is your compass, by the way. You can actually see the base in your compass, right? So we'll see how that goes. It almost looks as though it's not pointing actually at the building, but at the event. But that might just be me. It might, like, one part of me wants to say that it is the building because it would make more sense to point like a point of interest rather than an event. But the building's like here, so I'm thinking in terms of angles, the icon would probably be here. So maybe that's just the entrance, which is like closer to the event. So that's something to look into as to what that means. And does that relate to your field of vision? Because that would be actually a really handy tool for you. And it almost makes me feel that, yeah, it is pointing at the door. Almost. I don't know. The arrow pointing down doesn't, because it would make me feel like it's pointing to the trash over here. Assuming that's trash. No, it's like a little rod antenna station thing. But like, yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually not really. I got nothing to say about this. It's just okay. Story moments. It's a bandit camp. All right, let's bang bang. Um, Not to say that's not going to be fun. I'm just, to me, that's not a thing to talk about. I will say though, to go back to here, um, because I'm not done talking about this type of scene. Um, like we talked about No Man's Sky, and we did mention like base building and stuff like that, and No Man's Sky has base building, so there's a lot of parallels to be made here. Um, Now, what I wanted to say is that um, this type of thing tells me that the way that the game is built, it won't be. You can actually kind of see it here. I'll pause it right there. Right here. You see a line, right? So this tells me that the ground and the stone here is separate object. As Bethesda, and pretty much standard for pretty much any video game development, is that terrain is a separate object as the rest of your scene. But in a game like, say, No Man's Sky, which is like voxel based, the terrain and the rocks are basically the one object that you can cut through and stuff like that. So we're not going to get that. We're not going to get like hyper interactive planets like you would in No Man's Sky. Now, how interactive the planets are in No Man's Sky, that's a different discussion. Because I personally have not played it, but we're not going to get that level at the very least, which is kind of expected out of a Bethesda game. At the same time, I'm looking at this and thinking it's probably for the best because that would require them to uh, redo an engine that doesn't really serve their purpose. By that, I mean what we're going to get out of this game is more of a story driven space game than uh, a sandbox, do whatever you want type of. And it's not to say that like Elder Scrolls games and the Fallout games were not sandboxes, but you want to have some type of restrictions when it comes to having a game with narratives and stuff like that, where it's like, what happens if you dig a hole, right? Well, what does that do to the game? What does that do to your plot? It does nothing. Um, what does collecting rocks do to the story? Well, it has like a crafting thing going on. So unless you're digging or you're cutting up the terrain, has like your terraforming has anything to do with the story or like the idea of crafting, um, you might as well just not put it in, unless your game is about terraforming. But this is an RPG. This is about, you know, finding out the undiscovered whatever, the artifacts about the aliens and stuff like that. So um, I'm okay with it. So it's kind of like a sacrifice where I don't need the planets to be hyper interactive, so long as I'm getting my RPG in this environment. Um, Now the base here is low profile, so um, we're less likely to find skyscrapers in this game, and there will have skyscrapers or like very like high. I was gonna say fantasy, but it's like high sci-fi stuff like Mass Effect, Halo, giant structures, um, shooting out of the sky. But at the same time, those type of things are you need to render that in LOD from a distance. So I'm thinking the skyscrapers are going to load up. You'll see in a minute. They'll be load up in like smaller contained areas, like a city. The imperial city, that type of thing. But for like you know structures that you go in for a quest, you go in to like ransack or like shoot bandits or that type of thing. It'll probably be like very low uh, buildings. That helps on multiple things because you got terrain that can literally hide the building. Um, right, you barely see it here, but like with terrain that's like very mountainous, you can occlude the building. Therefore, you're saving processing GPU time to draw the thing because it doesn't have to render it. So it's one of those things where again it goes back to my idea of micro fidelity where they're probably focusing more on the close up detail rather than the micro detail. Um, but it's also like a side effect of their modular system, which we'll talk about later. But it's one of the things where you probably won't be able to build um, buildings that are too high in terms of elevation, like multi-floored buildings. Maybe you can, but I'm getting a feeling that you won't. Um, and if we can just move a little bit faster here, um, this building is maybe at most 3 stories high, maybe four. Whoops, and it's like one, two, three, four. It's probably multiple, but like what I'm thinking is that this module is just like one floor. It's just got a high ceiling or something, and then the rest is aesthetics and stuff like that. So I'm not getting my hopes up in terms of like, oh, you can build like skyscrapers, or we'll see much of skyscrapers. Everything in my mind points to everything's going to be very relatively flat. Um, and stuff like that. And I'll come back to that later on in the video because they showcase the base building more in detail. Um, but yeah, low bases means that you can not worry about rendering them at a distance because they're either hidden from the by the mountains or you know low buildings that are just like imposters or cards. They look better as flat objects than if you had a skyscraper, especially if they're cylindrical. Any cylindrical shape that's like very tall as a flat plane will look kind of weird at a distance. It could probably be like an actual cylinder in distance, but um, it lends itself to be easier when it's flat. Here is a little graphic thing also I want to talk about is HDR, where normally HDR for this type of like game is like tend to be used for like if you're in a dark area, everything is brighter because your eyes are adjusting to the environment, and if it's like outside, if I can get back to the outside bit, it's very bright, but the interior is very dark because your eyes are still adjusting or are still adjusted to the outside light. Um, that's not to say that this game won't have HDR because I believe Fallout 4 had HDR. I think even Skyrim had HDR. But I'm thinking in terms of transition, this feels like it's very much a quick environmental transition where there's a trigger in the door frame that is telling the game, okay, the player went through the door, render this, uh, you know, give me a different like fog. You can almost see the color changes from blue to like basically white or non-existent. I'm kind of curious that if you're in that hallway right here, if you turn around, what does the outside look like? I'm expecting the outside to be very, very bright because, first of all, HDR, but also because the fog is rendered differently. So it's one of those things where that's how they do it. Interiors, I got nothing to say about. This is interesting though because it all goes back to the idea of time, where this is your clock, where it tells you like what time of day it is. But because you're on a different planet than Earth, telling you that it's 4 o'clock might not give you much information. So I think they went with like, here's how the planet looks like from, I was gonna say the face of the sun, but the sun would always be pointing where it would always be bright. So I don't know, like the phases of your own planet, I guess, from your spaceship. Maybe I haven't. No, you're landed, so I have no idea how this is supposed to work. But I'm pretty sure this is supposed to tell you um, the time of day because if you go back, right, it's the same planet, I believe. It's just yeah, it's Crete. Yeah, it's still Crete. Time passed though, so who knows about that. Um, but yeah, other than that, combat here. This is a very, I was gonna say Bethesda style encounter. I'm sure other games do it as well, but they just kind of put the NPCs here and they trigger it, so it's like, oh, they're looking at the thing and you're gonna shoot it. This is very much standard, nothing new here. I have no idea why this guy is running at you while you have a gun. Um, so hopefully that will get adjusted. This side right here, which is probably more important for combat, I have nothing to say because it's very Fallout. It's missing, say, maybe the action points, but other than that, it's interesting to see the health bar on this side though, because we're especially for Bethesda players, um, our health bar is on the left side. Uh, Whenever it's like Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, uh, Fallout, I forgot. What does Fallout look like? Oh, interesting. I don't know about the Fallout, but at least the other ones. This is interesting to have. But probably more important for me, at least, is this because you have your field of vision here. I believe that's your field of vision. Uh, it almost did it change? No, it didn't. Okay. So I was, but it's red now, so it's like, oh, you're in combat. But I like the fact that it's telling you that, outside your field of view, there are dots. So this would actually help a lot better than if it actually is working the way I think it's working, this will be a lot more useful than dots on a horizontal plane. Um, Much more so. This worries me though, like this footage right here. It's very like at first glance, it feels like very like Call of Duty Bang Bang, which I have nothing against. Even though I say I prefer my more slower pace, like thought provoking sci-fi stuff. But what I find concerning is that in this footage you're getting shot but you're getting no feedback whatsoever. You're the only thing is the laser beam and your health bar drops and there's no like, for lack of a better word, like a betching Betty, where it's like, if you're playing flight simulators, right, betching Betty is like the computer tells you like altitude. There's nothing that tells you you're low on health or heart beating or like your screen's getting red or anything like that. um, every other game, you like even in Bethesda games, you have your character screaming, you're like, ah, ouch, ow. You have nothing here. So I'm kind of concerned about that. Um, your camera doesn't shake, like you're not moving as if you're taking hits. So that's the part I'm concerned about. The rest seems fine. As far as the HUD goes, like two probably means the level, right? It's a level two pirate. That's probably what everyone's expecting. Um, but yeah, besides that, everything looks like it should. This is an interesting one as well. Lockpicking. I like the presentation. I actually adore it. I think it's really clever. One part that concerns me though about this is what are you going to do with difficulty, right? It says it's novice, which okay, it looks easy. But what are you going to do? Are you going to add just more like rounds to the lock to make it more difficult? Because that won't actually make it difficult, it'll just make me longer. Because the problem with seeing this compared to say Skyrim or Fallout 3's lockpicking system where you don't actually see the picks, you basically go by feeling and sound. And I say feeling like you have some force feedback on, well, not your mouse itself, but the picks, you can see them wiggle, so you get a sense of resistance while you're moving your mouse or your keyboard. And it's one of those things where you don't have that here. In Oblivion, you had the actual pins that you can have sort of feel to it. This one doesn't have any feedback in terms of feeling because you're just matching the prongs to the holes. And to me, that looks very like it's interesting, but it's very like primitive in terms of like a puzzle or a mini game. Because no matter how many like holes you have in the circle here in the inner circle, you just won't click until you have both prongs in the holes. So I'm thinking, what is going to make it more difficult? More prongs? A timer? You have a certain amount of time to do it? Um, that I'm kind of worried because it doesn't seem like it'll be that fun to do. So I'm curious. Like for me, the most amount of fun that I had while lockpicking, I mean, I had fun with Oblivion. Skyrim's was enjoyable, but at sometimes you kind of felt. I mean, it felt more real, I guess, because you actually don't see the pins. But at some points, it's like you're breaking your pins too often. It's like you just want to get the treasure inside, and it's like very frustrating. Um, I guess that's the whole point, right? But in this case, it feels very rudimentary, where I don't see. They say novice, sure, but I don't know how master will look or play like. I can't be convinced with anything that I can come up with that'll make it any more difficult. This shows me that like this crate um, means okay, it's a Bethesda game, right? Everything's in a container. Nothing's new here. What is kind of new though is that normally in a container you have two states. You have um, closed and open, and then the rest you'll have like a overlay with text saying this is a loot box, and it's like empty when it's already empty, and if it's not empty, you just open it. Here they went a little bit one step further, where probably color coded if it's like red, empty, and stuff like that. But what I wanted to show is that the gun kind of appears in the. I don't know if it's just me not seeing the gun in the darkness, but like it's kind of like a point I want to make is that it actually renders what's inside when you loot it. I don't know why it auto equips it though, but it's one of those things where now, even though it's in a container, the game kind of understands what's in the container before rendering it, or to render it once it's like in an open state. So I kind of like that. I don't believe that the object actually exists uh, in this state because for rendering purposes and gameplay stuff. So um, I don't think the gun exists at this point. And here you can almost do a sleight of hand. It's like as it's open, you load it, and then it renders, and then you have it and you grab it, right? So that's interesting. But it's still green though. So, huh? I thought it was going to turn red. So I don't know what that's all about. But like, I'm assuming there's going to still going to be a way for you to like if it's a barrel, right? And you have like a bunch of food in a barrel, because we assume that's going to be a Bethesda game. You still want to have an idea of if it's empty or full. So you're still going to get the text and stuff like that. That's my interpretation of it. Um, Yeah, you kind of see that what I was talking about the environmental stuff right here, where they're relying on HDR here to make it very bright, so that the transition to the environment fog color is uh, less brutal, less immediate, less jarring. Combat here, nothing much to say. It's very, it's kind of weird, but like not too dissimilar to like what's like already in a Bethesda game. Um, because Bethesda doesn't really rely on you know runtime procedural generation. I'm thinking these guys are hand placed, so they're probably programmed to notice you, and then this guy runs for cover. They're pre-scripted, which is it's fine. Um, I can't imagine like sure I could imagine an AI do this, but I don't imagine the AI um, to do that on its own for this game, even though they probably could with the whole Radiant AI kind of stuff. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but yeah, this was kind of neat playing with the whole like um, Fallout style, or even the Skyrim like dynamic deaths or something like that. That's interesting. Here you see a little bit of the zero G, because you jump and then you use your rockets. So kind of makes me wonder why the AI doesn't jump as well. So is that going to be too uh or like overpowered of a way to I guess maybe that makes you like vulnerable because you can't run as fast maybe if you're in the air. I don't know. Like to me, it feels like combat would be more interesting if they would make jumping more prevalent thing, and maybe it'll be like Quake or those old shooters where every player is jumping like a maniac. But against AI, I'm thinking maybe the AI could do it too. I'm hoping. Um, but yeah, nothing else to really say about here. Um, they're shooting pirates. It's shooty shooty. And then he's talking. And then yeah, so the cities, right? So I was talking about like skyscrapers and stuff like that. Um, to me, this building is an example of that, or the city is an example of that. It's like one of those things where this is probably, and they mentioned it like in how you travel in like 1,000 planets or whatever. And I'll talk more about this in detail, but it's one of those things where this is a city that you load in. It's not so much an encampment or factory that you go in for a quest objective, to ransack or destroy like a base of operations for bandits and stuff like that. This is your imperial city. This is, or at the very least, this is a megaton, right? Where it's like you see it very early on in the game. They present to you because it's like a vista or a giant point of interest that they can like showcase, like look at how like you can nuke it with, like you can decide if you want to nuke it or not, right? Like the megaton type of thing, where presented really early on in the game, and then you kind of just meet your NPCs there, do your trading, so on and so forth. But I don't believe, based on what I've seen so far, that, and even including the rest of the video, that this is something that you can just stumble upon, No Man's Sky style or even Skyrim style, while you're just walking. It's like, hey, I see a giant building in the background. Let's go see it. You won't see that. I don't believe so. Um, that's my take at the very least. At the same time, if you have this enclosed area, and this is just the city, right? You can't go outside the city. This is what I'm thinking. It's like you're landing on the planet. You'll probably have like a master effect, Master Effect, Mass Effect style like landing sequence, but not necessarily pre-rendered, but like, or a Destiny 2 loading screen where you just see your spaceship flying around. You'll land, and then you'll be like in a shopping district or stuff like that. Talk to your NPCs, do your quests, um, but you won't be able to like walk out of town. I don't think. Um, the trees kind of make me feel like they're kind of saving geometry or processing power for the rest. It could just be like an alien planet type of plant, but I'm thinking like this was deliberate to also make it simpler to render once you're at like on the floor, um, to handle all the NPCs and the equipment that they might carry and the aesthetics and stuff like that. Because these type of trees are simpler to render than full lush. I mean, they look lush and stuff like that, but they're very basic when you look at like I would assume in any case like how you look at the way that you would build this in geometry would be less expensive than if you had thousands of planes with transparency to render and stuff like that. Here it's like a giant blob and you only have your transparency on the edges, so this is a lot easier to draw and to load. um, yeah, NPCs, so they're already pre-programmed to patrol and stuff like that. So I'm getting like Oblivion vibes here. Um, there's more NPCs than I think were ever in any other game so far. Um, so that's kind of cool. But I'm thinking they probably simplified some of the AI, at least for the background characters, to just walk around so that the GPU is only handling the the animations, and the CPU is only handling the path that they're walking, which is probably most likely predetermined. And the unique characters, say maybe the guards, they're probably on the path as well, based on how their creation engine is working. Like, when they put an enemy, like the ones that we saw in the shootout, right? They're probably where is the shootout? They're probably programmed to walk behind certain things for cover, but they're allowed to walk in this area, right? So I'm thinking that in here the key NPCs will be allowed, like guards, for example, to run around this area, um, fully utilize their pathing, but they're still, when they're idle, lock on a path on a rail. Now it's the matter, like if you start shooting here, what happens to the background NPCs? Do they have like a pre-designated area where they run to? Uh, I'm thinking yes, because if you just trigger like full-on AI, I'm thinking this might chug a bit. But maybe it's maybe the optimizer. I don't know, but this is what I'm getting out of it. Um, yeah, there's NPCs. And then there's the NPC again. Again, very basic trees. Um, okay, the pit boy. This is this is the pit boy, and I don't know if you've ever made the connection, but this is the same thing as this, right? So I'm thinking because you have it around. Whoop, not you. Because you have it around, that means that the information I was talking about when you're scanning, where is it? When you're scanning, see how like from here you scan and it changes, right? Well, if I can just, I wish I could scrub a YouTube video. And see, it changes. I'm thinking you could get that information through your watch. Um, Now, interestingly enough, we hardly ever see a character's hand in gameplay. Um, you have the pit boy where whenever you activate the pit boy, you see your arm moving towards the camera so you can see the device and handle it. You have um, in Fallout, you specifically in Fallout 3, you have the sequence where you're installed. You become of age and you install the pit boy, so you have this sort of like your character is looking at your arm type of thing. which is similar to that, or I'm getting vibes of it, or I'm being reminded of it. Um, in Skyrim, the only time you would ever see that would either be to like open a door. I'm trying to think of a. Is it Skyrim or was it Elder Scrolls Online that did that, where you see a hand push the door, but the hand animation is not necessarily linked to the door. It's just like a motion that it does. Uh, Maybe that's Elder Scrolls Online, but I'm thinking. Besides that, there's the trailer of Skyrim where the poster character kind of runs around next to like a cliff and he stops, and from his perspective you see the arms flailing, but you never really see that in game. So I'm start to think that this is just for flair, for like a set piece, but it's not so much like something that you'll see from your moment to moment gameplay, because you could say, well, oh well, this is a pit boy, so you'll see your arm. um, if you have that in the center of your screen, it's not even centered, by the way. But if you have that to as your pit boy to check your health and stuff like that, well, you check your health, but to heal, right, to activate the menus and stuff. This is kind of tiny. So what makes me think is that once you activate this, it'll actually like hologram uh, in your face, where it's like, okay, now it's a full menu. Maybe it's going to be giant circles, as like a Destiny, where most of the UI when you look at your inventory and stuff like that, I think it's like a circular design or aesthetic. So maybe they're gonna keep that circular design for sure. But I'm thinking like, how are they gonna fill the screen? So maybe like the preview of the weapon will be in the center, and like all the information is gonna be like on the sides. Maybe, I don't know, but I'm thinking like, you're probably gonna have like an animation of you pushing your Fitbit or whatever, and then the hologram will display fill the full screen. Um, this will never ever happen other than the story. Um, Characters. What is there to say? I think facial animations look good. Um, I'm not convinced that they're all going to be top notch like this for the entire game. I'm thinking that those are probably just for the key characters for the story, or worst case scenario, just for the trailer. So I'm not going to say that, oh man, they've completely revamped the way they're doing their facial animation. I'm not going to make that claim, but it does look 100% more better in this trailer than any other game that we've seen so far. Particularly the eyes. I'm more of a fan of what's going on with the eyes. They've done a great job with the eyes here. Um, and like the head motion of like the nodding and stuff like that, and the eyebrows. But you see here, this is more probably what you'll see more often, the sort of like dead eye, straight moving robot looking NPCs, which is it's fine. Um, I'm not going to complain too much about that. Um, I got nothing to say about the story. Um, but like, for me, this bit, the most important part for me was like, okay, like your characters at least look decent, right? They look good. And they've added moisture between like your eyelid and your eyeball. That little white line is really nice. There is a section in this trailer, though it looks distracting. At least it's distracting me. I don't know if it's distracting you guys. But what this tells me though is that they need help with hair. Hair is extremely challenging to do, but now that they've like revamped how to do their faces and their clothing, the hair needs a little bit of help. It's not horrendous, but I'm getting last gen vibes from it. We've seen better hair. I think Final Fantasy third, no, not 13. What am I talking about? What's the 7 remake? Um, that hair looks amazing. So this to me, it's passable, but this is like where the shortcoming is, because even if you have like the robot like moving dolls and like this, like you can see like the hand motion on. Can I just kind of like on her? This guy's not bad actually, but for her, this hand motion on the whatever iPad she's holding, to me, that looks like this is probably what you're going to expect for most NPCs, like looking straight up and just holding this thing like oddly. Um, because it's holding. So what's the holding pose? Well, this is the holding pose, right? Um, but it still looks good. So the only thing that kind of looks sketchy is the hair. Although I gotta say, this hairstyle works. So maybe they just don't know how to do straight hair convincingly. Um, but yeah, I'm getting like Mass Effect, Halo vibes from the plot. Um, you know, there's something about like collecting artifacts. So maybe it's not about like an invasion or anything like that. Like you're not saving the world or whatnot. But I'm thinking, you know, I'm still getting vibes of like intergalactic uh, things that happen, and you're like the human race has a role in it for some reason. Um, but yeah, I am hoping for a sci-fi type of scenario or ending where it's like it's about the human condition rather than we've defeated the Kurg or the Zerg or whatnot. Berg. Um, to me, I mean, it'll be serviceable if it is that way, but like the we've defeated the evil race or whatever. But I would rather have a more thought-provoking ending than just we've blown up the Death Star. So we'll see how that goes. Um, but again, characters, animations. This guy looks amazing, really good. Um, Lots of focus on the eyes. So I'm really. This is one of the things about um, the eyes is what makes a character believable. Even if it's like cartoon, you know, like if you're thinking about Wind Waker, like Zelda, like it's a cartoon, but the eyes are very expressive. It sells a character and the attitude that he's got and stuff like that. Even when you're trying to do for real, like the eyes are the biggest seller, and you need the eyebrows to work with that. So the fact that this to me means that they've actually rigged their characters to be able to do that convincingly. So maybe even though like the characters won't do that for all of them, like the animation, they won't all have that animation and that expression. I'm comfortable to think that okay, well at least they know how to do it. So I'm hoping for it. We'll see how that goes. Um, to me, this is again one of those loading. I don't like. To me, this feels a little bit disingenuous because I'm not convinced that it could be true, but I'm not convinced that this is something you can walk to. I'm thinking this is what you load, and they just happen to put a camera uh, behind the invisible wall, that sort of thing. Um, but it still looks good. Looks good. Nothing to really say about this that I haven't said before. Rendering looks great. NPCs, stuff like that. Um, Again, facial expression, animation. There's probably some mocap going on, but it's really good. Um, his hairstyle is really interesting. I like the fact that it's like more black on one side, or maybe that's lighting. Oh, it is lighting. Interesting. Um, this shot right here. This is giving me Fallout 3. Damn it. Can I get the thing to pause where I want it? There we go. This is getting like the power suit or whatever. It's like the shot where it goes in the trailer. You see like the destroyed uh was it Washington City or whatever, and you see like a dude in the power suit just looking at the camera. I'm getting this vibe out of this guy, which is kind of cool. Um, it might not be a parallel, but I'm making it regardless. Um, yeah. Other than that, okay, there'll be multiple factions, gunfight. This guy right here, is it this guy? I think it's this. Yeah, this guy. There's a problem with his eyes. I think he shows up in another shot where it's like more evident. Um, this guy looks all right. This looks good. Um, Like the presentation on that guy. This, I'm thinking this is either a set piece where you had to make a choice and it ends up killing one of the characters, or it's something that is triggered whenever two NPCs of opposing factions are close together and they're like in the background, that type of thing. So if you're walking on the side, this would happen like behind the scenes where it just, you know, sells you the idea that, you know, it's a living and breathing world. It's either one of the two. I don't think that this is going to happen dynamically, um, for like when you're in combat. This is, I don't think this is like a kill cam or anything like that, but it could be. But I'm thinking this is either a set piece or it got pre-programmed for a background character, that sort of thing. Uh, the only thing that makes me think that it's probably it's this shot right here. Was like this part right here means it's probably a story, but it could be a background thing. Um, there's zero G. I mentioned earlier asking if like if the NPCs could do zero G, but I believe this is like a inside a space station type of combat. So I'm not convinced that on a planet they'll be inclined to jump. But it is interesting that it's there. Very Fallout looking stuff. She's talking again. Good vistas though. I love the like when they're good at environments. This is what I have to say. In terms of environments, sure it's monochrome again. Um, kind of miss the colorful times, but it's one of those things where it still looks beautiful. Um, like even this shot, they know how to frame stuff too, not just for the camera, but like for the player. I'm getting obviously this is like a No Man's Sky kind of looking thing with the alien creature and the the vegetation and stuff like that. This is probably the most amount of colors you'll ever see in the game. I'm hope not, but as skeptic as I can be when I'm looking at the trailer, this is what I'm getting. This is really cool. This is giving me some hopes up, where it's not just about an alien invasion or some such, but it's about like, are you a god, or do you transcend, or something along those lines. Um, this is the kind of stuff that gets me interested and hopeful. Then I talk about character creation. Uh, it's character creation. I am very indifferent. I like this though. I'm not so much like, yes, this is good, but at this point, I don't care. A lot of companies put a lot of emphasis on you can customize your character. Yeah, but sure, right? Like it's like this, I could have a generic body and still have fun with just like a preset. Like I didn't have any complaints with like I was gonna say Skyrim, but like Morrowind. Like you just select a geometry that is a face out of a collection of pre-made faces, and you just play, enjoy. Hopefully, you have a good enough selection. But here they made it like, oh, fully customizable, which is fine. It's almost expected nowadays. So welcome to 2020, I guess. Um, but yeah, it's one of those things where I kind of okay, I'm okay. I'm more interested in this because I like okay the idea of a background and that gives you select skills, which will go back. I think they mention it in this bit of the in the video where they talk about, yeah, they talk about it here. So this guy, there's a problem with his eyes, and so I mentioned earlier that they did a really good job with eyes, and that is true. But for this guy, I think they kind of glitched it or they exaggerated it. I noticed like the wetness between the eyeball and the lids and stuff like the skin, and here you basically have like straight lines that's like distracting me. It's like, yeah, that happens, but this is too prevalent for my taste. And maybe like someone will say, well, scientifically this this is accurate, and it's like in my mind, artistically, this is I'm it's not ugly, but it is distracting me a bit. But the rest, like the skin tones, this is the fact that they made it work with this type of lighting, this is awesome. So these characters probably have like their own personal lighting rig, to like have good skin renders. Because I don't think this is like the JPEG, like the texture file that does this. This is mainly lighting that makes the texture look good. Um, the nose is fantastic too. So, but yeah, for me, the eyes, as much as they're the major improvement in this game, at least in the trailer, in this bit, I gotta go. Ugh. I'm hoping that most of the NPCs are going to look like the other ones and less so like him. Um, and then I go here, which is cool. To level up. This will burn my retina though, because I remember playing in Oblivion where it's like you're in a cave, you're in a dungeon, and then you level up and you bring up your HUD and it's like bright beige. And if you're playing in the darkness at night and you see that, it's like, oh my god, you're gonna burn your retina. So I'm hoping that this um, neutral gray will not be as bad. Of course, it's not pure white, so thank God for that. And maybe that was the reason for the gray. And of course, the suit will pop up more, so this is good. But maybe there's going to be like a mod to make this darker. Who knows? Um, but yeah, they're just kind of flexing on the character stuff, which is, it's interesting. Um, the most interesting thing for me about this is right here. It almost looks that there's like a refraction on the glass. And I say refraction, not reflection. And refraction is about like it bends the light, and I think it's probably like a very thin piece of glass, but I almost feel as though the eyeball gets distorted on that corner here, which it should be. Um, so I don't know if it's actually just me seeing things I shouldn't. To me, it feels like it's there. Here, this is the like more of the interesting part. Um, in some cases, it's like more or less structured, like Skyrim's, where you have like constellations, so like physical, social, combat, science, tech, and stuff like that. It's like these are the constellations, and then within those constellations, you have your skills, right? Um, and I'm really happy that combat is its own constellation. So that means that unlike Skyrim, where you have like light armor, which is combat, heavy armor, which is combat, swords, combat, archery, it's combat. It's all like different, like everything here. Well, it's basically all guns, right? So everything here is in one tree, which opens up the possibility that the other trees are more about your what you would expect from like traditional RPG elements or utility, right? Being able to, well, social, right? Like look at social, like it's not a diplomacy skill at this point. You have a crap ton of it, and this is, I mean, there was speechcraft in Skyrim, sure, um, but this to me feels more in depth and more customizable. And of course, this is like rank one, rank two, rank three, or three and four. But like, it's one of those things where how is it structured? Is it like on a line like that? I would like to. Maybe it doesn't do that because you don't actually see lines connecting it. But there's probably like you must have a minimum of X on this row before you get to use the ones on below or whatnot. But I really like the idea that, if this is social, imagine what science is. Imagine what tech is, right? So it's like, okay, well, you're hacking on tech, um, repair maybe. But if that's the case, like what's science then? So in science, you got like biology maybe, but you're thinking, okay, well, is it biology like you have more health points? Because if that's so, what's physical then, right? So to me, this is so encouraging. And this is, and maybe I'm not seeing something that I should, which should make it less exciting for me. But to me, this is, I mean, the only thing that's less exciting for me is probably the aesthetics of it. The presentation looks very, and if this pops up out of your like hologram Pit Boy watch thing, I'm not getting the circular designs that I believe should be in pretty much carpet throughout the entire game because it's in the iconic shape that you want. It's your logo. It's your pit boy. It's very sci-fi. This is very Excel, so I'm a little concerned about that. But uh, besides that, like I'm really optimistic about this. Um, do they talk about anything else? The guns. Okay, so that's the interface of the guns, right? I mentioned earlier that like it should be like in a circle with the gun floating and stuff on the side. Um, Again, it looks nice. Like this looks more like the Pit Boys thing, like the aesthetics that I was looking for, but at the same time, like it's not matching the aesthetic of the shape of it. So they went more utility and functionality than the aesthetics, which I guess that's fine. Um, but like again, like how does that project from your Pit Boy, right? I'm convinced that it's coming out of your Pit Boy for some reason. Because otherwise, why have a watch? Like to me, that's the part where it doesn't make sense. Um, but like we were looking at like science, food, research, weaponry. It's all about crafting stuff. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's just the. It's not so much the inventory, but it's like the crafting HUD. But why would you make a crafting HUD look different than your inventory screen, right? So it's like, as much as I hope and I want the inventory to be circular, this is probably what we're gonna get. Um, I love that the weapons at the bottom of the interface, the options. But yeah, this the combat. I'm not expecting combat to be any different than Fallout 4. Um, but yeah, we're getting to the base building thing, and this is the part where I was talking about like um, structures that don't become landscape skyscrapers because of your camera is probably going to be fixed to the top down view, so you're only going to design on one axis, or technically two axes because it's like a x and y, or x and z in this case because y would be upwards. Um, but I think the most interesting aspect of like whoops, the most interesting aspect of this is where's that screenshot? Do they show it? Where is it? Where is it? Or maybe I'm too late. Where is it? Darn it! I know they show it. Oh well. Um, it's the idea that okay, so having these modular. Oh, there's that shot I wanted. Okay, so having these modular is one thing. If you think about Fallout 4, the way they did it, you place walls and stuff. In here, it's modular, but in much bigger pieces. But what's interesting is that you do have um, a way to select where you want your module to connect to, right? Which is duh. But that means that they have to render a door here. So this part of the wall here, and it's probably in quadrants, like in pizza slices. Maybe it's even tinier than that. I don't know. But like a section of the wall has to disappear to be replaced with another part of the module to allow that door to exist. Um, so this is very interesting. And I like that. And it's because of this specifically that I think that they can't build upwards, like in terms of like multiple floors. And it's why if you go back to like the beginning of the video, where I think most of the structures will be where is it? Like this, where this is probably like one giant piece here, because they got to use the same, not necessarily the same tools, but the same assets that we as the players do, right? So when they're building this stuff, they're using the modular system, and therefore they're probably not merging the geometry, the polygons in one mesh to make it easier to render. It's probably all segregated into different pieces, which is probably why you want to keep the building look closer to the ground so that you don't have to render them too far from a distance. Because if you had to render that far in the distance, you would have to you render each module piece to it, right? So keeping it low, that type of thing. So most of the buildings, even those that will be custom built by the design team to create your story and the moments, will most likely be flat. I'm making a call here, but like the other example that we have of the skyscraper is something like this, and it's like this is not modular at all, right? So this is what I'm getting out of this trailer right here. Um, because they do it also with the spaceship too, right? So you think about it like a module and you connect it. That means that you got to connect doors and hallways to it. And the way you do it is you're just snapping pieces together. So how does a cockpit connect to this piece, right? So they have to make um, a variant of the pieces for whenever there's a version where there's no door here or there is a door here, that sort of thing. Because you wouldn't want to have a door that leads to nowhere. So they have to replace that piece. Now they said you can customize your ship, but what about the interior? Is that table part of this HUD of this module, or is this also a module? Like you just put it there, and this is like a hologram table or whatever it is, a coffee table, and that belongs into the engineering room or whatever. And the other, doohickey that you put needs to be in the bridge or that sort of thing. Like you know, how does that work, or if at all? All right. I for the sake of simplicity, I'm thinking this layout is predetermined by the module itself. But here's to hoping, especially for the modders out there, but even for the those who want to live in this fantasy sci-fi game universe and have their own house and put the flower pot in one corner, in the kitchen and stuff like that. This needs to be each individual element where it's custom made and stuff like that. Hopefully, like you could put your basic props there. All your junk maybe it could be saved on your spaceship, maybe, right? Um, like what about this? And they talk here about hiring a crew, and I don't get that. Like, what is that purpose? Like if I was on board of say a ship like the Enterprise, I can sort of see it because you're playing the role of the captain. In this case, sure, you're playing the role of a captain, but yeah, this is all because you're flying here. What the heck does your crew do? I'm getting a lot of like X-wing, Tie Fighter, X-wing versus Tie Fighter, Wing Commander, Elite Dangerous vibes from this, which is amazing. I love flight simulators. You got like your engines and your shields and stuff like that. But is your crew working in the background? Do they give a bonus to how fast it regenerates power or repairs the ship? I have no idea how that works. Um, but you know, we do know at the very least that it's actually like a very competent like flight sim in a way. I don't believe you'll be able to land like No Man's Sky. I'm pretty confident that it's going to be like a Destiny 2 or a Mass Effect where you just load. But having this is probably the most interesting bit of the game for me in terms of gameplay because yeah, running and gunning is fine, but being able to shoot in space is or first of all, I love space combat, but it's one of those things where it varies the combat, where it's like you do have laser pew pew, on foot, but you also have it in space, and the way that you play and you approach it, the way you equip yourself is completely different, right? So, and maybe the AI here will be a little bit more challenging rather than just being a damage sponge, right? Be able to move a spaceship to shoot at you is probably easier to program than say the AI to decide when to block or cast spells or jump down a ledge, that sort of thing. Everything else is to be expected, though. Meteors, planets surrounding you, that sort of thing. It's just cool. One thing I've noticed in this shot, though, is the LOD of the shadow. Um, I'm a little disappointed by that. Um, I like the honesty, though. They're being honest about what they're showcasing on their for their game, but um, I guess they could have allowed for a longer draw distance uh, for rendering shadows, at least in space, right? Because you're thinking, well, what's in space? Well, you got the planets, which are supposedly super far away, right? The space stations are probably very far away, but still close enough for you to see all the detail. So it would be interesting to have uh, actually maybe like a separate draw rendering distance for out of space because you want to see. I mean, I'm sure that this is probably like this is running on console, so I'm sure that if it runs on Windows, that you could crank that sucker up, right? Getting all the graphics fidelity. But I'm thinking it's probably more demanding on the planet, on the surface of the planet, than out in outer space because you have less objects to worry about and your scene is less dense. So I'm thinking, could they maybe put more shadows on on a further draw distance? But it would need to be a separate, shadow slider for that for space. Um, that's what I'm getting out of this shot. I'm hoping they're probably not going to do that, but like maybe if you could mod it, that could be a thing. Like when you're in space, the script just kind of changes the graphic settings, and when you're loading the planet, it changes back to your previous settings. Maybe, but I'm already seeing things that I would like to see improved. This is interesting mini game. So you're probably not going to get docking on the space station, but at least docking to invade or board other ships. That might be interesting. Like abandoned ships. This kind of looks abandoned. So maybe you're just, docking to loot the ship and to see maybe if there's an alien. That's kind of cool. I like that. It's kind of like another mini game other than lock picking. I can't imagine that being a thing for landing a spaceship or docking a spaceship in on a space station, but at least for Delaric ships, that could be a thing. Um, yeah. Oh, this is where they show the planet stuff. So to go back to what I was saying about like the cities, right? So if you go, where is it? That type of thing. So for me, this is like again invisible walls everywhere. This is just a closed area, and it's about you know this type of thing where it's like it's right here. You load this part, and of course they say, oh, you can go anywhere you want on the planet, but I think the rest of the planet is just bare bones just to say that they have a planet. And this is goes back to what I was saying way earlier in the video where I was talking about me preferring fantasy over sci-fi because sci-fi doesn't lend itself really well, especially for video games, because of situations like this. Because if you think about planet Earth, we have hundreds and hundreds of cities, right? Maybe there's only one starport, maybe, but like the rest of the planet is populated, right? They have cities and stuff like that. So if you think about these planets, it's kind of like unrealistic that only a small chunk of a planet is habited. So besides wildlife, but it's one of those things where I want to see them being able to make it so that sure points of interest for your story for your quests are in there, but that inside of the other areas of the planet, right? So I'm thinking that when you click on an area to land, it'll just generate. a landmass, like a random landmass for you to navigate in, because I don't think you can walk the entire thing, right? So it's still zone based within the planet, but at least maybe they could use the coordinates of where you're clicking on the planet as the seed number for like procedural generation, maybe, hopefully, so that when you're in there, sure, it looks generic, but at least it opens up the idea that maybe they could spawn a bandit camp, a facility, uh, you know, a crashed spaceship, something for us to, not just gather minerals, because I think that would be pretty boring if they didn't allow for, you know, um, maybe random events or, dynamic stuff to happen other than just walking around and looting rocks. Um, Now, this was the part where a lot of people got scared when they said, "Oh, we got thousands of planets, um, thousands of unique planets." So you're thinking, well, how many are there, or are they actually going to be interesting to look at? Are you expected to fly through all of them? And the answer to that will be, of course, no. The the way I'm interpreting this is that the ones where your story will lead. You got the main quests. You are most likely going to have side quests because this is a Bethesda game. All of these planets will have content to them, right? They'll be that's where the content creators, the level designers, the graphic artists, and the the level artists, they're all pitching in together to create like a cool universe. And I'm not thinking that for a single quest you'll visit 10 planets or thousands of planets and stuff like that. Maybe for the main quest you'll see maybe 100 planets, maybe. But like, yeah, there's 100 systems, 1,000 planets in total. I think that's a decent amount of planets because they want you to be able to go to other planets, even if they has nothing to do with the story and stuff like that. And if they're generic like giant ice balls, then let them be generic ice balls. Like Jupiter has a ton of planets that we might not care about, except for a few people that do. Um, I think Europa is the most interesting one. There probably is another one. Like I'm not huge into like astrology and like exploration stuff like that, but it's one of those things where I'm not too knowledgeable about it. But um, I'm okay with a couple of hundred, well maybe not 100, but like if there's a 20 to 50 planets that are just like the moon, right? It's just barren. It's just dust. You're just having fun jumping around and shooting people if there are people there. Um, like I don't need every planet to be like Earth, and I'm hoping that they're not trying to do that because otherwise they're shooting themselves in the foot. Um, this is different than No Man's Sky because No Man's Sky was supposed to be the whole point of that game is exploration, right? It's a Minecraft game where you just do what you do and you gather stuff and you build stuff. Why? Because you want to go to the other planet and build stuff and explore stuff. In this game, role playing game, there's a narrative to it, there's a story. You're confined to a segment of the universe. It's not supposed to be infinite. So I'm totally okay with the sacrifice of not being able to go to all the planets in the entire universe, just a few thousands, it's fine, right? I'm okay with a few hundred planets that are good. Um, because I think the story matters more to that. So those are like if you want to put, Starfield and maybe No Man's Sky on two opposite extremes of the same coin, right? They're space games with the shooting and the space travel and stuff like that. One is story driven and the other is not. Maybe there is a story with the No Man's Sky. Again, I haven't played it, but I feel like Bethesda can flex that more, and I'm expecting them to on that front. Now, there is that worry that, well, lately Bethesda has been less and less of an RPG maker and more of an action RPG thing, where it's like, even when you think about Skyrim, it's got less RPG element than say the previous titles, um, maybe. But again, I think a lot of the changes that they've done is to focus your attention on the moment rather than the stats and the dice roll and the stuff like that. So to me, I'm okay with that. But I do hope that the decisions that I make while creating my character, while leveling up my character, actually has a purpose to it, right? I think that's basically what people are asking for, more so than um, having a dice roll on your shooting to make sure that you get a headshot or not. Like I don't think that matters as much as your stats having an impact on your shooting, maybe. Um, so yeah, my biggest concern with this game is again with the visual vistas. Like it goes a little bit with the whole uncanny valley type of thing. The more realistic you try to make something look, the more awkward it can become until it looks good again. In this case, I apply it in the sense that the more vast of a universe you make it, you're more likely to have planets that are, I was going to say generic, but the word I'm looking for is probably like the color palette. I'm worried about the color palette more so than um, you know what to do on those planets. Because I'm convinced that the planets will be fine from a gameplay standpoint. They showcase a few variety. This one I'm not sold on. I mean, it looks great. Don't get me wrong, but it's one of those like it's a micro detail type of thing. But what about the rest of the planet? What does it look like? Is the entire planet looking like this? Because of course you could just land and say I've seen it all, and then you're done. This is more interesting, right? Trees. This one, Jurassic Park again. This one's more interesting. This is interesting. How many of these can they make, right? You're probably going to see a red version of this, right? A blue version of this, a an ice version of this. Um, so I'm concerned about how many variations of the aesthetics they can do, because in terms of content, I'm sure that you can put like some bandits here shooting at me. You can put like I don't know, like a an artifact there somewhere. Well, maybe not for the story, but you could put like a crashed spaceship, and if it's a generic spaceship, like it's still going to be fun to look into and see what I can loot. Because I'm not going to look at all of the crashed spaceships, right? Maybe all that I can find, but not all that's like available in the game. At least I'm not expecting. Whenever I play these open world games, I'm never expected to do everything on the single playthrough. I know some people do, and I think that's probably the biggest worry for them. But I'm optimistic about it. This one looks bad. They just shouldn't have put that one. To be completely honest, this one looks like it got made on Age of Empires 2 map generator. Um, Maybe that's level of detail, but it's like based on distance because it's got like grass, and it's like immediately giant rock with no grass on, and then right grass again, and it's like either on or off. Um, to me, that looks weird, and this has a severe lack of water for the type of plants that's there. Of course, they're alien plants, but with that type of aesthetic, I'm expecting water. Um, this one's nice. I actually prefer that one. The only thing that kind of bothers me with like long shots like this is that you're probably going to start to notice rocks that are similar. Let's see if we can't spot some. I feel like this one is probably the same one as this one, but rotated. Maybe. But you're bound to see repetition on some of this stuff. Um, like this one and this one, maybe. I don't know. It kind of looks kind of just placed oddly. Um, but the rest, like when you're up close, it looks good. So I'm not too concerned. Um, but yeah, that was Starfield. Again, it's one of those things where I understand the concern that people have with this game. I have concerns of my own. For me, it's the color palette. Um, because sure, from one planet to another, it might be different, but the one planet and stuff like I'm going to spend an hour on one planet, looking at beige or blue all the time or green, whatever color the planet is, might get a little annoying or boring for me aesthetically. Because again, I mean, there's research to back this up, but in most cases in games, you want the variation to happen every 20 minutes or so. That's why dungeons in like MMOs they last about 20 minutes. That's why you know the rain falls every like the weather will make rainfall changes like every 20 minutes and stuff like that, or sunrises, all of these things to make it look slightly different and interesting. So now we're just hoping for like mechanical differences where it's like gameplay wise, what does it change from one planet to another? I'm thinking nothing will change from one planet to another except for procedurally generated. But they didn't mention that. That's the part that worries me is the fact that they didn't mention that their planets are procedural generated, but it's almost expected that they are. But I'm hoping that, yeah, if you click on a planet, it's like a seed number based on the coordinates, and you can basically land on any pixel on that planet, and it'll load a zone for that point, and then you just, land in. Anyways, those are my take. Um, Took longer than I took, but again, I like to ramble a lot, so hopefully you enjoyed. Let me see what you think. Hopefully this video will age well. And yeah, thank you, and I'll see you guys next time.